Let's dive right into this explainer by looking at a huge paradox so many of us are feeling right now. We've all been sold this very specific story, right? Study hard, get a good job, and trade your energy, your focus, and your absolute best years for a salary. But for a massive number of people, that story is completely falling apart. I mean, even as you get promoted, even as your income grows on paper, it feels like you're running in place on a treadmill that's just speeding up. You're working harder than ever, yet somehow true wealth and freedom just feel further and further away. It's incredibly frustrating. Well, today, we're going to break down the exact mechanics behind why this is happening. We're looking at a very real phenomenon known as the invisible theft.
To really get this, consider this visceral metaphor. You've probably heard it before. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it'll immediately jump out to save its life. But if you place that same frog in cool water and just turn the heat up, degree by degree, it won't realize the danger until it's entirely too late. The water boils and the frog is trapped. Well, this exact analogy describes our modern economy perfectly. The heat is being turned up around us, slowly and invisibly draining our wealth. But because it happens gradually, month by month, year by year, we don't panic. We just try to swim a little faster.
So how does this boiling water actually translate to our everyday lives? It brings us to the core question that addresses the pain point we all feel. Why doesn't hard work translate to wealth anymore? Well, because while your paycheck might go up by a tiny fraction each year, the cost of absolute essentials, I'm talking your groceries, your rent, your fuel, are outrunning it at breakneck speed. You aren't failing at budgeting. The actual value of what you earn is literally being siphoned away. To really understand the root cause of this invisible theft, we have to go back to the absolute basics of how value is even exchanged. Let's look at a little story, the allegory of the yellow stones. Imagine a village where workers are paid in yellow stones. One stone buys exactly one box of food. Simple, right? A young, hardworking villager agrees to trade his daily labor for 5 yellow stones, perfectly feeding his family of 5. It's a completely fair deal. But eventually, the village leaders want more work done, and they realize they're running out of these authentic yellow stones. Instead of figuring out a real solution, they just go behind a curtain, paint regular gray rocks yellow, and mix them into the pile. They proudly announce to the worker, "Great news, you're getting a raise. You now get 6 stones for your labor." The worker is absolutely thrilled, but here's the catch. The village food vendor suddenly sees way more stones flooding the market, while the actual amount of food hasn't changed at all. So what does the vendor do? He doubles the price. A box of food now costs 2 stones.
So, the crucial point is that this is the birth of inflation, and it's built entirely on an illusion. On paper, the worker's perceived wealth went up. He feels richer because he's physically holding 6 stones instead of 5. But in reality, his actual purchasing power just plummeted. Those 6 stones can now only buy 3 boxes of food, leaving his family hungry. Having a higher quantity of currency absolutely does not mean you have more wealth. Those extra stones didn't create more value. They just diluted the value of the hard work the villager had already done.
And this brilliantly illustrates a fundamental truth we often forget. Money isn't actually real. Seriously, it is simply an agreement based purely on trust. History offers this wild example from the 13th and 14th centuries on Yap Island. The islanders used these massive limestone rocks as currency. Some were so heavy they couldn't even be moved. People would just agree, okay, that rock over there, that belongs to you now. And the transaction was done. There's even a famous story of a limestone rock that fell off a boat and sank to the bottom of the ocean. Nobody could see it or touch it, yet the community continued to trade its ownership because they trusted it was down there. The physical object didn't matter at all. The mutual trust did.
Let's trace how that trust evolved over human history. In the very beginning, villages just relied on mutual favors. If someone helped you build a house, you remembered it, and months later you helped them plow their field. As societies got bigger, this shifted to a direct barter system, trading rice for tools, for example. But barter is incredibly inefficient. I mean, what if I have rice, but you don't need rice? What if the guy with the tools only wants milk? It's a mess. To solve this immense friction, humanity moved to metal coins like gold and silver. They were durable, you could divide them, and most importantly, everyone universally trusted them. You didn't even need to know the person you were trading with, you just had to trust the gold. But metal coins brought a brand new problem. They were super heavy, and carrying a lot of them made you a massive target for thieves. So an ingenious solution emerged. People began taking their heavy gold to the local goldsmith, who had a secure vault and armed guards. The goldsmith would lock up the gold and hand the owner a paper receipt proving it was safe in there. Soon, a collective light bulb went off in the marketplace. Instead of trekking all the way back to the vault to withdraw heavy gold just to buy some grain, people just started handing the paper receipts directly to the merchants. The paper itself became the currency because everyone trusted that it represented physical gold sitting in the vault.
And this brings us to the first temptation. The goldsmiths are sitting in their shops and they notice this massive loophole. People were bringing gold in, but because everyone was just trading the paper receipts, hardly anyone ever came to take the physical gold back out. So the goldsmith realized, wait, I have 100 grams of gold in my vault. What if I just write out 130 paper receipts and loan the extra 30 out to farmers and charge them interest? He did it, and nobody noticed. Money was literally created out of thin air. The goldsmith enriched himself simply by printing extra paper that wasn't backed by anything at all. Think of the total money supply as a ruler used to measure the value of things. Originally, the ruler was fixed. One receipt strictly equaled a set amount of gold. But when the goldsmith printed unbacked receipts, he was essentially shrinking the measuring stick. Now you had more receipts chasing the exact same amount of real goods, like apples or grain. So the merchants naturally had to raise their prices. The people who got the newly printed money first, usually the goldsmith and his wealthy friends, got to buy things at the old cheap prices. But by the time those receipts circulated down to the everyday working people, prices had absolutely skyrocketed. The everyday worker was unknowingly robbed of their purchasing power.
Well, it didn't take long for the most powerful people in the world to realize just how lucrative this setup was. Kings and rulers wanted to build roads, expand borders, and fight massive wars. But they knew if they aggressively raised taxes to pay for it, the peasants would revolt. So the kings went to the goldsmiths, who had basically become bankers at this point. The king would ask for these newly printed receipts today, signing a document promising to pay them back with interest tomorrow. This was the birth of the formal government bond. It's a very clever trick. The king gets to spend the money and look like a hero today, but the massive bill is just handed down to future generations who are forced to pay it back through heavy taxation.
And this brilliantly illustrates a cycle that repeated for centuries, bringing us to a critical modern milestone, an attempt by the whole world to actually fix the system. Fast forward to 1944. After the absolute chaos of World War II, the global economy was incredibly unstable. The world desperately needed an anchor. So global leaders met at Bretton Woods and agreed on a totally new system. Almost all global currencies would be pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be strictly anchored to physical gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. For a while, this restored immense stability and trust. If you had $35, you knew for a fact you could exchange it for an ounce of real physical gold.
But as always, history repeats itself. The United States began spending heavily on wars and social programs, essentially printing more dollars than they actually had gold in the vaults. Other countries got suspicious and started demanding their physical gold back. Facing a massive run on their gold reserves, in 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and shocked the entire world. He officially suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. The final rope was cut. From that exact moment on, the dollar, and by extension the entire global financial system, was backed by absolutely nothing physical. It became purely based on trust in the government.
Which brings us to the financial reality we live in right this very second. Modern fiat money has zero physical anchor. In fact, most of it isn't even physical paper anymore. Think about it. When you get a mortgage to buy a house, the bank doesn't grab heavy stacks of cash and hand it to the seller. They literally just type a number into a digital ledger on a computer screen. Money is created digitally, instantly. And because central banks and governments can expand this digital ledger without the constraints of physical gold, the currency supply just continuously grows. This is the engine of the invisible inflation that slowly devalues your salary, makes your groceries infinitely more expensive, skyrockets your cost of living, and ultimately makes you feel poor despite working harder than ever before.
So we end right back where we started, in the pot of water. The heat is on, the currency is being debased, and the water is absolutely boiling. The invisible theft is happening right under our noses, every single day. You cannot simply ignore this reality and hope that hard work alone is going to save you. You have to understand the system. You have to educate yourself on how money actually works, how it loses value, and how you can position yourself, maybe by acquiring hard assets or leveraging new opportunities to ensure you aren't the frog that stays in the pot too long. The system is what it is. The question now is, what are you going to do to navigate it and protect your own future?